Hey, welcome to the channel. We hope that you enjoy today's stories and check out the chapters on the video to see all the stories for today. But before we get into this video, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon to get notified when we release a new video. So let's get into the video.
Richard Feynman once said, "Never confuse education with intelligence. You can have a PhD and still be an idiot." What are some real-life examples of this?
Experience 1. My ex-boyfriend's mother was a linguistics professor and knew over 10 languages. She was also one of the dumbest people I've ever met. Some examples: she believed that in case of emergency, stewardesses catapulted out of the plane. She was also convinced donating blood causes some blood disease and you can die because of it. But my favorite one was when she said her son's orthopedic problems were not a result of a serious injury he had. His knee hurts because he eats too much ketchup. Experience 2. I had a boss who was an engineer who put a couple of $100s in change in a bank's pneumatic drive-through tube where it got stuck and they had to use a jackhammer to get it out. He was upset that the bank was charging him for this because he didn't know this would happen. They had large signs saying not to put change in the tubes, including on the tubes themselves. Experience 3. I have a PhD, and I work with a bunch of PhDs. Basically, a lot of them think that because they succeeded in one area, they are an expert in every other area of life. And they always have strong opinions about everything. I think it's also called a PhD syndrome. Experience 4. My first call at my first IT job was in a medical laboratory. There was a doctor who had been in the job for years and she called saying her computer would not power on. I walked her through some troubleshooting and nothing worked. Is the computer plugged in? Okay. Is the monitor on? Okay. When did the problem start? Type of questions were asked and she answered them all. I go up to her office and indeed the computer is plugged into a power strip which is plugged into itself. The cleaning crew had deep cleaned her office and never plugged anything back in. Doctor plugged the power strip into itself thinking that as long as it was plugged in, that was all she needed. Experience 5. I went to 3 ERs when I felt something was wrong with my arm. It felt like a bug bite on day 1 and by day 4 a bungee cord from my elbow to my wrist. 3 doctors said it was a skin irritation or dermatitis. I kept telling them something was wrong. I have no medical degree. I work in property management. Day 5 I walked into another ER and said, I don't care if I have to pay out of pocket or sit here all night, but something is wrong with my arm. Finally, after many rude looks and comments, I was given an ultrasound of my arm. Then rushed to an MRI. Then told I was being admitted. A 3-inch blood clot in my upper arm, 2 in my chest area, and 1 had passed my lung already. Diagnosed with factor II gene mutation 22 days later, blood clotting disorder. Experience 6. My wife's stepfather was a chemist who currently has diabetes. One night he went to the ER because his blood sugar was dangerously high. He claimed he was eating well, he normally doesn't, so there's no reason why his blood sugar was high. In his car was a 2-liter bottle of ginger ale mixed in with grape juice. He said that the two canceled their sugars out and we didn't know what we were talking about because he was a chemist and he knew how to combine things. Experience 7. I was at a keg party at college and the gravity keg was set up. Someone complained that the beer was not flowing, so I checked that the keg was still almost full. Turns out someone closed the air intake on top. I opened the intake and poured myself a beer. Problem solved. A few minutes later someone else complains the beer is out. I told them the keg was full a few minutes ago and it was a tap problem that I fixed. They told me they just came from the keg. I go back to the keg and find the intake was closed again. opened it and poured the young lady who said it was empty a beer. As she is leaving, my sweet mate comes in and goes to the intake can and closes it. Now my sweet mate is a straight-A student who gets all is mostly due to his photographic memory. Back to the keg. So, I told him that he needed to leave the intake open to let air in to displace the beer coming out of the lower tap. He then proceeds to tell me that since the beer is carbonated, air is not needed to replace the liquid volume lost when the beer is dispensed. So, I asked him 2 questions. If it is not needed, why is there an upper tap? And does he really think the amount of gas the carbonation gives off in a glass of beer is equal to the volume of the liquid beer? He thought for a few seconds and his only response was, "I have a 4.0, what is your GPA?" Then he walked away. Experience 8. Peter Duisberg. A molecular biologist who works as a researcher at UC Berkeley and has an otherwise stellar career and is well known for his work. Became an AIDS denialist, claiming there's no link between HIV and AIDS. Led countless people down the rabbit hole, including many who were HIV positive. These individuals ended up infecting others and refusing antiretroviral therapies. This included an AIDS denialist activist named Christine Majori who infected her infant through breastfeeding, thinking, "Hey, it's not a big deal, it's just HIV, it doesn't cause AIDS." Experience 9. I worked with a girl who graduated from Brown. She would never shut up about it. Always Brown this and Brown that. I went to a state school, and it was apparent that she looked down on anyone who didn't attend an Ivy League school, so one day she was doing that, and I couldn't stop myself. I said something like, "Oh, you went to Brown?" And yet, here we are, together in the same place, doing the same job.
Do you like listening to these stories? Do you want to hear more of them? Then click that like button, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. And check the description for links to more videos and interesting stories.
Experience 10. My college roommate, the smartest person I've ever met, spent nearly an hour trying to shove a desk back into the corner of our room at an angle. She wouldn't listen to me because, in her words, she got this. After she finally gave up, I walked over, pulled the desk out completely and straightened it with the wall, and pushed it back in. One movement, no struggle. Many a time we had where I'd realized she might be the smart one, but I've got more common sense. Experience 11. Not quite PhD. But I was at a party, in the UK, full of med students, and stereotypically everyone was off their face drunk. Well, some guys fell over and broke his collarbone and immediately got rushed by a dozen of them, all fussing and asking him the same questions over and going through the checklist. Half an hour later he's still on the couch in pain, and I go in to ask if anybody knows why the ambulance is taking so long. Nobody had an answer because nobody had called one. A party full of medical students hadn't called an ambulance or made any transport arrangements for a guy in severe pain with a broken clavicle. Idiots. Experience 12. As someone who works security in a hospital, I can say a good 90% of the doctors there are smart but lack any type of common sense, and sometimes I wonder how they function on a day-to-day basis. Edit, I also forgot to mention I'm almost 2 years in a relationship with a pediatric cardiologist, and it's as shocking at home as it is with the ones I work with LMAO, but I can't say it's boring. Experience 13. This is basically what The Best and the Brightest by David Halberstam is about. It tells the story of how the Kennedy and Johnson administrations got the United States into the Vietnam War, and it particularly zeroed in on Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. He kept escalating the conflict at every turn, and if you questioned him, he could bury you in data showing that the US was winning the war and the Defense Department just needed more troops and more money to put us over the top. I'm grossly oversimplifying a great book, but that's the gist of it. A great companion piece to the book is a documentary called The Fog of War by Errol Morris. It's a one-on-one interview with Robert McNamara filmed near the end of his life where he ruminates on the lessons he's learned. After watching it, 90% of people come away from the experience thinking that McNamara is a particularly intelligent and sagacious man, even though there's a mountain of evidence showing that that's not the case. Experience 14. I used to work at a university, and tons of academics are incredibly educated in their chosen field but have the common sense of your average dachshund. My favorite was probably an entire group of geology professors and PhD candidates who got stuck for a good few minutes in an entryway because they didn't think to check if the door required a pull rather than a push. Bearing in mind that they just entered through that same door not an hour before. Experience 15. My ex had a real lack of knowledge and common sense when it came to children. She's currently completing her PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology. She was confused though when I said I couldn't go out after putting my toddler to bed as I had no one to babysit. In her mind, once my daughter was asleep, she no longer needed anyone here to take care of her. I chalked it up to cultural differences and never being around children. Eventually, though, our opinions on raising kids differed too much and I had to end things for my daughter's sake. Experience 16. As someone who did 2 trades and then decided life is better with education, my experience currently going to uni is how clueless so many people are in uni. I wouldn't say they're an idiot, but tons of ignorance develop living in a student bubble your whole life. I rented a room to a guy who did his master's, and it would take him hours to cook dinner. I watched him one day and he just couldn't wrap his mind around cooking things that take different amounts of time to cook. Like, he'd start cooking potatoes and wait until they were done before moving on to the next thing he was going to eat them with. Experience 17. Worked at a tech company and was made team lead. One of our team members was a PhD in astrophysics. He would ping me constantly for how to do things that we had well documented. How to install certain programs, and how to gain access to servers or code repositories. Literally, we would sit in Zoom calls together and I would just read the instructions out loud and watch him do them. I was utterly confused as to how he could breathe by himself. Experience 18. A longtime good friend, absolutely brilliant. Can literally beat you at chess blindfolded. Engineering in college and one of the smartest people I've ever met. But he's a big picture guy, sees how things develop and has a great long-term vision. Incredibly successful. But little things? The guy couldn't pack a suitcase and wouldn't know how to book a flight. Was making boxed mac and cheese and couldn't figure out why it was so watery. Yeah, he didn't drain the water after the pasta was cooked. Experience 19. On a personal note, my wife was a PhD candidate when we moved in together. Early on we went to a party and when we got home, I told her I felt inadequate because I was the least educated person in every room and felt kind of dumb listening to them all go on about things I had no idea about. She said to me, "They each know the most about some little thing they just got their PhD about.
Some gene mutation or how some molecule interacts in some rarefied environment. But apart from that, they're all just regular people who can't figure out how to match their socks or talk to a member of the opposite sex."
She said,
"You're one of the most curious people I know. Your library is bigger and more diverse than anyone else I know, and you've actually read them. You ask questions and talk to everybody and have actual things to talk to them about because you know about things they're interested in."
Now she's an MD, PhD, and all her friends are doctors of one kind or another, and I'm still the least educated person at the party, but now I can see people are just people, and yes, you can be super smart about one thing or another and still be a screw-up in the real world. It's way more important to be a good, kind person who does what you say you'll do than the smartest kid in class. At least that's how we raised our kids anyway. Experience 20. Not really an answer to this, but I feel like sharing. I have a bachelor's in creative writing. I went through the worst times of my life getting through college, dealing with depression, and missing my friends and family I moved away from and have nothing to show for it other than a shiny piece of paper saying I did it. 1. My current career uses nothing I learned in college, and I'm trying to get back into writing as a hobby and hopefully find some worthwhile opportunity to actually utilize my education. For years, I've been pestered by friends and family. Anytime I misuse a word, don't use proper grammar, misspeak, or autocorrect to mess up a text, they will be on my ass immediately to say something snarky about.
That's not how a writer should talk.
Or,
Wow, it's amazing you got a degree in English with how badly you speak.
my go-to response is often something like, "My text messages aren't being published, shit for brains." It's a really sore spot for me and immediately gets my blood boiling.
We hope you enjoyed listening to today's stories. If you want to see more stories, check out these videos or check the links in the description for more videos. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And ring that notification bell.